Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You're about to hear a radio address given on the evening of Sunday, December 7th, 1941, by First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. In the fall of 1941, Eleanor Roosevelt began giving a weekly Sunday evening radio address on NBC called Over Our Coffee Cups. On that Sunday, the day of the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, Mrs. Roosevelt decided to go ahead with her radio address as scheduled that evening. Therefore, she was the first Roosevelt to address the people of the United States following the attack on Pearl Harbor. Your speaker is Susan Phillips, who lives in Olney, Maryland, and is the Life Enrichment Coordinator for the Cottages Independent Living at Brook Grove Retirement Village. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Susan Phillips as Eleanor Roosevelt.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am speaking to you at a very serious time in our history. The cabinet is convening, and the leaders in Congress have been with the president all afternoon. The State Department and Army and Navy officials have been with the president. In fact, the Japanese ambassador was talking with the president at the very time that Japan's airships were bombing our citizens in Hawaii and in the Philippines, and sinking a transport full of lumber on its way to Hawaii. By tomorrow morning, the members of Congress will have a full report and be prepared for action. In the meantime, we, the people, are already prepared for action. For months now, the knowledge that something of this kind could happen has been hanging over our heads. And yet, it seemed impossible to believe. Impossible to drop the everyday things of life and to focus on the one thing that mattered: preparation to meet an enemy no matter where he struck. That is all over now. There is no more uncertainty. We know what we have to face, and we know that we are ready to face it. I should like to say just a word to the women in our country tonight. I have a boy at sea on a destroyer. For all I know, he could be on his way to the Pacific. 2 of my children are in coast cities on the Pacific. Many of you all over the country have family and friends in places that have suddenly become a danger zone. You have boys in the services who will now be called upon to go into action. You cannot escape anxiety. You cannot escape a clutch of fear in your heart. And yet, I hope that the certainty of what we have to meet will make you rise above those fears. We must go about our daily business, more determined than ever to do the ordinary things as best we can. And when we find a way to do something more, to build morale, to create a sense of security in our communities, we must do it. Whatever is asked of us, I know we can achieve it. We are the free and unconquerable people of the United States of America. And now I must say a word to the young people in our country tonight. You are going to have a great opportunity. There will be high moments in which your strength and your ability will be tested. I have faith in you. I feel as though I was standing upon a rock, and that rock is my faith in my fellow citizens.
Roosevelt saw the development of World War II and knew that the entry of the United States into that war was inevitable. His efforts to arm and prepare the country for that war were held back, however, by a hostile Congress and a very isolationist public. That all changed on December 7th, 1941. Listen to the radio on December 7th, 1941.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced. The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu. We take you now to Washington.
The details are not available. They will be in a few minutes. The White House is now giving out a statement. The attack apparently was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu. The President's brief statement was read to reporters by Stephen Early, the President's secretary. A Japanese attack upon Pearl Harbor naturally would mean war. Such an attack would naturally bring a counterattack, and hostilities of this kind would naturally mean that the President would ask Congress for a declaration of war. There is no doubt from the temper of Congress that such a declaration would be granted. This morning, Secretary Hull talked with the Secretaries of War and of the Navy. Now the two special Japanese envoys, Admiral Nomura and Special Envoy Caruso, are at the State Department, engaged in conference with Secretary of...
And so America was drawn into World War II. On December 8th, 1941, a tired and haggard President Franklin Delano Roosevelt went to the Congress of the United States to ask for a declaration of war against Japan. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate and of the House of Representatives. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with our nation, and at the solicitation of Japan was still in conversation with its emperor and government, looking towards the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. Indeed, 1 hour after Japanese air squadrons had commenced bombing at our island of Oahu, the Japanese ambassador to the United States and his colleague delivered to our Secretary of State a formal reply to a recent American message. And while this message simply stated that it seemed useless to continue the existing diplomatic negotiations, it contained no hint or threat of war or armed attack. It will be recorded that the distance from Hawaii to Japan makes it obvious that the attack was deliberately planned many days or even weeks before. In the intervening time, our government has deliberately sought to fight these people off. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to the American people and the American people. I regret to tell you that many American lives have been lost. In addition, many American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. Yesterday, the Japanese government also launched an attack against Malaya. Last night, the Japanese forces attacked Hong Kong. Last night, the Japanese forces attacked Guam. Last night, the Japanese forces attacked the Philippine Islands. Last night, the Japanese attacked Wake Island. And this morning, the Japanese forces attacked Midway Island. Japan has therefore undertaken a surprise offensive extending throughout the entire Pacific area. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. The people of the United States have already formed their opinion and well understand the implications of their life and safety of our nation. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense. But always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it shall take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might shall win through to absolute victory. I believe I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but we will make certain that this treachery shall never endanger us again. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounded determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. I ask the Congress to declare that since it's unprovoked, and dastardly attack on the Sunday, December the 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to step out of the role of Franklin Roosevelt for just a moment and give you just a 2-minute history lesson on World War II. You know, when this war broke out, all the countries had their leaders in place. Germany had their dictator, Adolf Hitler. Italy had their dictator, Benito Mussolini. Britain had Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The USSR had Joseph Stalin. The United States, we were lucky. We had FDR. Roosevelt and Hitler both came into power within 30 days of each other, and both died within 30 days of each other. On January the 24th, 1943, Roosevelt was with Churchill and Stalin at Casablanca. There he demanded I'll accept nothing less than the unconditional surrender of the Axis powers. Because Germany was beaten before in a couple of years, they're right back in the battle. We haven't seen anything from Germany since. But 1,364 days, 5 hours and 40 minutes later, on the deck of the USS Missouri, stationed in Tokyo Bay, the Axis powers signed the unconditional surrender that Roosevelt had demanded at Casablanca. At the end of the war, this country had gone from the 18th military power in 1940 to the #1 superpower. And I want you to understand and put your hand over your heart and thank God for a country like this, that we not only won the war, and we didn't want to be involved in this, but our country, after the war, went into Germany and Japan and sent missionaries in, leading them to Christ. One such man was this bomber on the 16th airplane of Jimmy Doolittle. He wasn't a Christian man, but he was captured by the Japanese, tortured for 40 months. They sent him some books, one of which was the Holy Bible. He read in there, he said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." He made a decision. He said, at the end of this war, I want to go back and teach the Japanese love instead of hate. And he came back to the United States and got well, went out to Seattle, Washington, to seminary, Seattle Pacific Seminary, got married, went back to Japan, stayed 30 years witnessing to the Japanese. The Emperor of Japan went on radio, said he wasn't God, only mortal men, and a lot of the Japanese committed suicide. But this man was so effective and had other people with him, and one such man came by, picked up his tract, didn't look at it for 10 months. Finally, he read it, had counseling, he accepted the Lord. This was the man who led the raid on Pearl Harbor for Cheetah. He was such a great evangelist that Billy Graham had him come over and preach on the hour of power. That's the kind of country, ladies and gentlemen, we live in. Don't listen to all these people that put your heart in love. Love your neighbor, respect your neighbor, be kind to your neighbor, and look at your neighbor through God's eyes and become a good neighbor. God bless you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Delmas Wood and Susan Phillips. Another round of applause, please.
Thank you.